Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is now 1 p.m. UTC, and on behalf of the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this webinar on the challenges faced by seafarers and identification of best practices during the COVID pandemic. Without further ado, I turn to agenda item 1, opening address by the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected all of us with unprecedented impact on our lives, our economies, and our societies. Yet the global supply chain has kept on turning, with shipping delivering medical supplies, food, fuel, and so many other goods needed in our daily lives. This is thanks to more than 1 million seafarers on board world merchant ships. Their dedication and professionalism in the face of mounting challenges is worthy of our great admiration and gratitude. Every day we are receiving messages from physically and mentally exhausted seafarers, desperate to leave their ships and go home. Still, more than 400 seafarers remain trapped at the sea. The current situation is unsustainable. This cannot go on. Seafarers from all nationalities must be classified as key workers and be allowed to leave ships. And their replacement must be able to join those ships to start their work. I'm sure that all of you agree that seafarers are crucial for the safe operation of ships and the protection of the fragile marine environment. Safe navigation, safe shipping, safeguards maritime trade, which is vital to the world economy. IMO has worked with a broad cross-section of maritime industry organizations to develop a set of protocols to ensure safe changeover for all ships' crews. These wide-ranging protocols contain recommendations to maritime administration and other relevant national authorities, such as health, customs, immigration, border control, seaport, and civil aviation authorities. In addition, IMO's Maritime Safety Committee has adopted a resolution on recommended action to facilitate ship's crew change, access to medical care, and seafarer travel during the COVID-19 pandemic at the recent extraordinary session of the committee in September. I believe these efforts to provide a robust base for concrete actions to facilitate crew changes. What we need now is the cooperation and the collaboration of IMO member states, but also maritime organizations and other relevant national authorities. And this is where I'm certain this series of regional webinars will be crucial. Here, you have the opportunity to consider practical implications of the protocols and the resolutions, to share best practices, initiatives that have worked in your region, to exchange views and to find new solutions. Communication is key, and this webinar series facilitates communication among a wide range of stakeholders. The crew change issue is a humanitarian crisis that has implications for all of us. Today, we must all ask ourselves, what will it take to resolve this crisis? We all need to work together. Action is needed now. We all depend on seafarers. They should not be the collateral victims in this pandemic. Seafarers deliver for us, and now we need to deliver for them. I thank you for your kind attention and wish you fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
We now turn to agenda item 2, compliance with resolution MSC 473. And I would like to invite our first panelist for today, Her Excellency Geneviève Jean van Rossum, Ambassador of France and permanent representative to the IMO, who will share with us the experience of France in compliance with the resolution and also common practices and lessons learned while applying the recommended framework of protocols for crew changes. Geneviève, over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you all can hear me well, and I really wish to, first of all, thank the IMO for inviting me to share today with you the best practices adopted by France during this COVID-19 pandemic in relation to the challenges faced by seafarers. As you know, with the COVID-19 pandemic, crew changes became difficult due to travel restrictions imposed by different states. Border closure, difficulties in obtaining visas, significant reduction of the number of commercial flights, and the establishment of quarantines are all new challenges that we have been facing. Initially, ship owners often negotiated an extension of boarding times. With the ongoing crisis, the ability to organize crew changes has become increasingly critical. Ship owners need to choose among a restricted list of commercial ports of call. The need to make arrangements to facilitate crew changes is essential. The International Maritime Organization, as well as the International Labour Organization and the European Union, among others, have called upon states to recognize seafarers as key workers and to facilitate their movements. France heeded these calls from the international community and quickly set up different tools. A crisis unit to help French ship owners overcome the constraints caused by the crisis was created. Its main role is to support and monitor the requests from ship owners for crew changes abroad. For this purpose, it relies in particular on the French diplomatic network and on the Central Directorate of the Air and Border Police. France also created a procedure aimed at facilitating crew changes in mainland France and overseas. We published a list of ports where crew changes for ships, regardless of their flag, is guaranteed, easing the travel of seafarers, regardless of their nationality, to and from French ports, both in mainland France and overseas. In this system, the French overseas territories have played an essential role given their geographical location close to major trade routes. On Reunion Island, for example, which is located in the Indian Ocean, more than 1,000 crew changes operations have been carried out. They involved almost 14,000 seafarers, and in August alone, 282 ships and 3,728 seafarers were able to travel ashore or offshore. 80% of them were foreign seafarers. Altogether, about 23,000 seafarers, both foreign and French nationals, were able to transit in mainland France and overseas since March for crew change. As you know, the situation has now improved. There are far fewer seafarers who have exceeded the duration of their contract on board ships flying the French flag, and some more ports have reopened for crew changes. However, while part of the world is affected by the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, some countries are closing their borders to seafarers from the most severely affected countries. France is considered to be part of them. In addition, many flights from European countries are cancelled due to a lack of passengers because of the containment measures taken in these regions. The current situation is tending towards a decrease in air traffic. As a result, there is a risk of a second wave of the crew change crisis. As a consequence, some ship owners could face extra difficulties. Indeed, the rerouting of ships and the additional cost due to the transit of seafarers represent a considerable amount of money for these shipping lines, even for the largest ones. For a 50,000-ton oil tanker, 1 day out of charter represents an extra cost of about 50,000 euros. In this context, the French Minister of Marine Affairs works on the following tracks. First of all, measures have been taken for the inclusion of seamen in the derogatory categories. Seafarers and fishing crew are recognized as key workers and can always transit through France to join their ship or to return home. Administrative facilitation measures have also been taken concerning documents. The Seaman's Book enables to obtain a certain number of facilities, such as the seafarer being able to go ashore without a visa in the port of call of his or her ship. Obtaining a visa issued at the border is also a possibility. Preventive measures have also been taken against coronavirus. Since the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, France has taken measures to protect crews. A web page intended for seafarers and shipping companies presents the main measures implemented and recommendations in the context of the COVID-19 outbreak and state of health emergency in France. Some coronavirus control measures have also been taken. In France, quarantine is said to be voluntary. It is not mandatory. European seafarers are not subject to quarantine. When non-European seafarers come to France by plane, they must be tested before departure and are not subject to quarantine in France if they have been tested. More and more tests are being organized when seafarers are disembarking. France has also implemented some visa exemption measures. A visa exemption on departure is possible, as visas are issued on arrival at the border for a maximum length of 15 days. We also have measures to facilitate air transportation. France has supported ship owners' initiatives to carry out charter flights. Some of those flights have become regular on a fortnight basis. Finally, we have taken measures to ensure the health of seafarers during crew changes. During those changes, health corridors have been set up, sometimes with transit hotels. When it was not possible to repatriate some seafarers to their home countries, they have been hosted in France. They were able to rest at the ship owner's expense in hotels or holiday centers. They were not in contact with the local situation, the local population, excuse me. Regarding now initiatives taken by the IMO, I would like to recall that France has designated as early as September 23rd its national focal point on crew change and repatriation of seafarers in compliance with resolution MSC 473 ES2. France has also issued, since the start of the pandemic, 5 letters to be disseminated among IMO member states and associated members in order to keep them up to date with the latest decisions concerning administrative procedures applicable to seafarers in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Finally, France took some initiatives in the IMO organs in relation with the challenges faced by seafarers. A proposal has been made to the IMO Facilitation Committee in October to request that all countries open up the possibility of obtaining a visa at the border in case that seafarers have not been able to obtain a visa issued at the consulates. Also, after a long debate on November 10th, the implementation of an essential tool to facilitate the organization of crew changes was decided during the IMO 102 Maritime Safety Committee. It consists of a global database of ports that facilitate crew changes on the GESIS platform. This database will list the conditions and means available in each port in the world. By giving a single access to official information from states, it will simplify the organization of crew changes in each country. This IMO database will be operational by the end of this year. I must also mention the fact that the Minister for Marine Affairs announced during the last World Maritime Day on September 24th that France would submit a proposal for an amendment to the International Maritime Labour Convention in order to facilitate crew changes. The aim is to modify the clauses that allow the extension of contracts in order to avoid overruns of contracts that are too long to be allowed by the flag authority. Regarding the impact of those measures, at this point, we can see that sanitary measures have been well taken into account, as there have only been a few cases of sick people on board French ship owners' vessels, and these cases have always been well managed. Some ship owners have also drafted their own health protocol, in addition to the protocol drawn up by the French administration. The measures introduced during lockdown, such as the issuing of visas at the border, have been used by the ship owners whenever necessary. Seafarers involved in trade and fishing have a derogatory status in France and in the European Union as well, which has greatly facilitated their travel in Europe. As a conclusion, I must recall that the transit difficulties affecting seafarers led to additional economic costs, threatening the existence of some ship owners and causing a major human danger. This situation may lead to technical risks on the vessels due to a lack of maintenance and crew fatigue, which can seriously jeopardize maritime safety. It is therefore of utmost importance, despite the second wave of the pandemic, to continue to make the greatest efforts in order to solve the challenges met by seafarers all over the world. I thank you for your attention.
Madam Ambassador, thank you very much for your presentation. We now move to agenda item 3, sharing of experiences, common practices, lessons learned during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I would like to invite Mr. Guy Platten, Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping, to share with us the experience of the maritime industry. Guy, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for this opportunity to address this webinar on this vital issue of seafarers and crew changes during COVID-19. I would like to place on record my sincere thanks to the leadership of the Secretary General and IMO colleagues during this crisis. We have seen unprecedented levels of cooperation as we all try to work towards solutions. We also note and welcome the initiatives by France, we've just heard, and others, which have been discussed earlier this week at MSC 102 and have largely been adopted, which is great, and each providing a solution to this issue. Although the situation is now starting to stabilize and we have seen some improvement in recent weeks, nonetheless, this improvement is patchy and there are still hundreds of thousands of seafarers on board ships beyond their original contracts, looking to be relieved and replaced with fresh crew. This is a vital issue, and an issue that, if not resolved, has the potential to impact on the delivery of sustainable development goals, disrupt supply chains, and increase costs for all countries just at the time when they can least afford it. Shipping transports over $7 trillion worth of cargo each year. Failure to properly address this crisis could lead to a logjam which will impact each and every country in their ability to trade globally. The shipping industry is very pragmatic and we are adept at finding solutions, but this is one issue we cannot absolutely resolve without the support and help from governments. We welcome the interventions and efforts of member states on this call, but the humanitarian crisis still remains and much more needs to be done. We as employers have been doing all we can, often going to extraordinary efforts to undertake crew changes where possible and diverting ships thousands of miles to enable them to take place. But it's not enough and seafarers cannot extend their tours of duty indefinitely. The situation is not sustainable. The COVID-19 pandemic has put an extraordinary challenge before the world, and its effects and impacts are being felt and seen everywhere. Quite evidently, the pandemic is already having significant impacts on our industry. It has shown the vital importance of maritime transport as it supports the maintenance of the global supply chains and carries the essential commodities, energy and supplies, including medicines. It has also shown the vital role that seafarers play. They are on the front line. They are the heroes of world trade. They are undoubtedly global key workers. However, seafarers need the help of governments and the international community. We remain in a situation where seafarers are still on board many months over the end of their original contract, with no end in sight to their plight and the resolution of crew change crisis to ongoing travel and other restrictions imposed by governments. At present, we estimate that hundreds of thousands of seafarers are still beyond their contracts, with the same number ashore ready to relieve them, often waiting with little or no pay. Again, this is unsustainable. We know by you being here today that you understand the issue. However, the main obstacle to resolving this crisis is that many border protection and health authorities still lack understanding of the essential role of seafarers in the flow of global trade. The evidence is clear. The risk presented by cargo ships and crew travel is relatively low, especially given the extensive health protection measures now being taken by our industry, which are detailed in the industry-developed framework of protocols for ensuring safe ship crew changes, which were endorsed by the Maritime Safety Committee earlier this week. We have no wish whatsoever to bring infection on board our ships. Not only is that disastrous for the crew on board, but it also costs business. In contrast, the risks presented by further inaction to the resilience of global supply chains is incredibly high. This is the message that we really need for you all to take away today. The time to act is now. It is an issue of equity. Equity for the seafarers and equity for all countries, particularly developing economies. If the issue is not addressed, the likely countries to be hardest hit will be those least able to overcome the consequences. There is a critical need to address the many restrictions and administrative problems that continue to prevent the conduct of crew changes. Red tape and bureaucracy must not be allowed to trap our seafarers or lead to economic problems in countries. As an industry, we are working hard to ensure the health and safety of our essential workforce, and we stand ready to support all efforts to work on rapid implementations of programs that will facilitate safe crew change, which will benefit all. Looking ahead to the next few months, and with the welcome arrival of the effective suite of vaccines, it is also vital that our global key workforce of seafarers are prioritised in receiving the vaccine to ensure that the supply chains suffer the least disruption. The seafarers at service deserve nothing less. Thank you.
Dear Mr. Guy Platten, thank you very much for your presentation, and I wish you a very fruitful next meeting with the SCAT Industry Roundtable organized by my colleagues here at the IMO, which is about to start any moment now. Ladies and gentlemen, I can see some questions are coming through the Q&A chat function of this online platform, and I would like to encourage all of you to use this communication channel for your queries. My colleagues and I, together with our distinguished panelists, will try to provide answers to the best of our knowledge. Please bear in mind that the recording of this webinar will be made available to all of you for future reference if you need it. Now it gives me a great pleasure to welcome our next panelist, Mr. Brandt Wagner, Head of Transport and Maritime Sector Unit, Sectoral Policies Department at the International Labour Organization. His unit is responsible for shipping, fishing, ports, inland navigation, civil aviation, road transport, and rail transport. Brant, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Ambassador, IMO colleagues, and others for inviting the ILO to this event. I'll speak a little bit about what the ILO is doing on this issue. For those, I think most of you know, the ILO is a specialized UN agency where our main aim is to seek decent work for all, which of course is a challenge during this crisis. And in our organization, we're what we call tripartite, with governments, employers, and workers all having a voice and vote. The most important instrument that we have to protect the rights of seafarers is the Maritime Labor Convention 2006, as amended, which is of course known as the MLC 2006, which has been now ratified by 97 states, representing well over 90% of the world fleet. When the pandemic crisis first broke out, ILO's constituents turned to the ILO Secretariat for guidance on how to deal with maritime labor issues and COVID-19, in particular with respect to the application of the Maritime Labor Convention. Following consultations with our government, shipowner, and seafarer constituents, we published an information note back in April, which is available on the ILO website. This referred to the exceptional situation of the virus. It noted that it might render compliance with some of the obligations of the Maritime Labor Convention impossible. It said, however, there was a need for a pragmatism in the approach taken while also protecting seafarers. We also called in this note for governments to make sure they consult with shipowners and seafarers organizations when exercising any flexibility under the convention in order to deal with the problem. And we also explained there was a lot of information in this note on the addressing certain issues as seafarers' safety and health, maximum periods on board ship, repatriation, and other issues. Meanwhile, the ILO was also responding to requests from individual states and shipowners and seafarers organizations when there were concerns about some states that were not fully complying with their obligations on the Maritime Labor Convention. For example, not allowing seafarers to have access to medical care ashore in foreign ports. Then as the crisis developed in July, we no longer felt this was a surprise situation, and the ILO updated this information note it had developed earlier, emphasizing that every attempt should be made to comply with the MLC 2006, even when it is difficult and expensive to do so because of the pandemic. In that note, we further emphasized that the maximum period for seafarers to remain on board ships is 11 months, which is derived from the provisions of the Maritime Labor Convention, and we stressed that continued extension of seafarers' contracts cannot be considered as a solution to the current crisis. And we invited governments to refrain from authorizing new extensions of the period of service on board. Now, the ILO and IMO have been working together very closely on this issue, together with the International Chamber of Shipping and the International Transport Workers Federation. We've been active members of the Maritime Coronavirus Strategy Group, which is led by Guy Platten. And together, the IMO and ILO and others have developed a coordinated approach to individual governments to try to solve the crew change issue. So we've been in contact with governments to try to identify problems and then what to do to move forward. We, of course, recognize the considerable work by the IMO, by Secretary General Lim and his team, their great leadership in the process. And our Director General has also been very active and vocal on this situation. And we're working closely with other UN organizations like the World Health Organization, as represented by Dr. Wang here. Yet the crew change issue continues and the solutions are far too slow. This is due to the restrictions that were mentioned already by the ambassador, disembarkation to port, difficulties in obtaining visas, lack of commercial flights, shortages of COVID-19 tests, and other problems. Now, what are we looking for? one of the things we're looking for is already been said by others, is that we really need all ministries, departments, and agencies in countries to work together to solve this problem. It's not a problem just for the maritime administrations, the labor authorities. And we're doing our part to try to facilitate that dialogue among those agencies. We're holding direct discussions with governments, again, to identify obstacles to crew change and overcome them. And also, we're strong supporters of the protocols to crew changes that have already been mentioned by others, that were developed by industry and then put out as an IMO circular, and now have been further enhanced by the decisions at MSC 102. And others, besides that, we also are working with others to kind of send the message out to the whole global supply chain to do their part as well. We're concerned that some charterers are not helping facilitate the diversion of ships to ports where crew changes could exist. We're concerned that maybe further up the supply chain, there needs to be more action by retailers and others to put pressure on to solve the problem, which is really quite a serious issue. So finally, we've already seen recently, we've just seen cases of seafarers on board for as long as 19 months. And as several people have said, this is a completely unsustainable situation. In the ILO, it was mentioned, the ambassador referred to the Maritime Labor Convention. We'll probably discuss this issue we will discuss this issue at the Special Tripartite Committee of the Maritime Labor Convention next year when it meets, first virtually and then physically. And also, even as we speak, the governing body of the ILO is considering a resolution on this subject. So thank you very much.
Mr. Wagner, thank you very much for your presentation. Now it gives me the great pleasure to invite our next panelist, Dr. Niglan Wang from the World Health Organization. Niglan, over to you. Please share your screen with us.
Thank you very much for inviting WHO to this webinar, which is a very important meeting for this critical topic. And we would like to commend the tremendous efforts that IMO, the ILO, and ICS, and the others to tackle this critical issue. So we just used, I would like to use this opportunity just to share some information from WHO side in relation to the travel issue, which is very much relevant to this topic. Just to start with, I think some of you may be aware that WHO has published our travel-related guidance, which is a public health considerations for resuming international travel. It was published on 30th of July. In that guidance, WHO has made a strong recommendations that each country should identify and the priorities for essential travel, and the priorities should be given to emergency humanitarian actions. And another important category is the travel of essential personnel, including the personnel in transport sector, such as seafarers, and cargo transportation also should be given the prioritization because they play a very crucial role for providing the essential medical, food, and energy supplies. So of course, then this also, it needs to be noted that the sick travelers and persons at risk, for instance, the people with chronic diseases or underlying health conditions, for instance, that if somebody is in diabetes or somebody has lung diseases or heart diseases, then they should delay or avoid the travel to and from areas with community transmission. So this is a consistent message whenever WHO issue any travel-related guidance. Then the call for defining and also the prioritize of essential travel, including the transportation sector for seafarers, for instance, it's always in this type of WHO guidance. So the other information I would like to bring to your attention is also the WHO has held the 5th International Health Regulation Emergency Committee for COVID-19. This is a committee that will provide the recommendations to WHO DG in terms of the recommendation for response to the pandemic. So the 5th IHR Emergency Committee has come up with a set of recommendations for both WHO as the Secretariat for the International Health Regulations and also for member states. So for WHO, the committee recommends to continue to work with the partners to update and review the evidence-based travel guidance. This guidance should be evidence-based and also takes coherent approach, including those targeted use for diagnostic and the quarantine measures. And these measures should be decided in taking into consideration of the transmission level, response capacities in the origin and destination countries, and also other travel-related specific considerations. For countries, we request the country to regularly review their public health measures, as these measures should be really decided based on the risk level and also the evidence, so to ensure that the measures are proportionate with the risk level. Also, I would like to use this opportunity to somehow to stress on the importance of a multi-sectoral public health preparedness and response for the international travel and transport. This is a requirement under the international health regulations. We have been seeing lots of the collaboration and coordination endeavor in the international level and the regional level. However, these efforts should be really trickled down to the national level, because then in this case, the policymakers and also the relevant ministries will be together and thinking about the viable solutions in a collaborative manner. So just to illustrate the main elements for this preparedness and response in the multi-sectoral approach, which is pre-identify your arrangement for transportation of the cases or suspected cases, and the treatment facilities for isolation of cases and for quarantine of contacts, diagnosis facilities, also the cleaning and disinfection, so on and so forth. What's most important is a mechanism that to enable the cross-sectoral event communication, information sharing, so they can put heads together and to really think about the solutions and to tackle any issues related to the public health outbreaks. So this is not only for the COVID-19, this is a sort of the mechanism that has been requested by the international health regulations. So this is a long-standing mechanism, however, can be customized to different outbreaks in the context. In any case, the information or any disease actions happening at the points of entry, it has to be captured by the national surveillance and response system in the public health sector, and which will be subsequently reported to WHO. So here I wanted to reiterate this very important message for WHO. This is a very consistent message, regardless of outbreaks and pandemics, that we always call for the needs of keeping the essential supply chain operating, because this is the lifeline for people's life and for the medical response, public health response as well. And also identifying the seafarers as key workers when countries start to define their essential workers. The last but not the least, I also wanted to share the information in terms of the protected the health of seafarers. And protecting health is WHO's mandate. So in this case, we have worked together with IMO, ILO, ICS, and other industry associations. We have published a guidance for promoting public health measures in response to COVID-19 on cargo ships and the fishing vessels. We also have produced our online course, which is very interactive and to allow you simulate the scenario, let's say, and to help you to absorb the knowledge and the know-how for responding to the events when you are on board or when you are on the transition for crew change. so on and so forth. So we're going to share that the information on the online course, because the guidance was published on August, but the online course was just finalized lately. We will share that with our partners in IMO, ILO, and ICS, and that hope that could also provide some useful information. So I will stop here, and I will be very happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wang. It was a very elaborative and very good presentation. And last but not least on our list of panelists today is Mr. Branko Berlan, the International Transport Workers Federation accredited representative to the IMO. Branko has a degree in maritime studies. He was a seafarer for 15 years, finishing his seafaring career as chief engineer. Branko was Assistant General Secretary of the Seafarers Union of Croatia from 1991 until 2013, and he represented seafarers of Croatia at the IMO and ILO. Then he joined the ITF in May 2013. Branko, over to you.
Thank you. Do you hear me? Is it
Yes.
okay? Okay,
Yes,
great.
okay. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. To be very, very brief, and there is not much to be added after these excellent presentations by the other panelists, but only what I will say is that there is an estimated that more than 400,000 seafarers are exceeded their contracts tours of duty by months. At the same time, scheduled renewal of certificates for seaworthiness of ships continued being validated by remote inspection, while cycles maintained in shipyard has been postponed indefinitely in some cases. For possible crew change have been cumbersome, to say at least for the ship owners, with the unreasonable increase in costs, which on occasion may have convinced them to not affect crew change at all. This has increased the backlog of seafarers waiting to be repatriated. Let's be clear and frank. This remains a huge problem, and now, today, we could easily say that about 500,000 of the frustrated and tired seafarers are trapped on board their ships waiting for return home, and at the same time, an equal number of seafarers waiting to board without the possibility of bringing money to their families. So we're talking about 1 million people in emergency need, and that in a way really become a matter of humanity. That represents about 75% of active seafarers, which deserve the same respect as any other key worker and must be recognized internationally and nationally as essential workers, or as we now generally call key workers. But unfortunately, these are not the only issues that COVID-19 brought on surface which have to be facilitated and solved. And that's what I would like to emphasize. First, to facilitate maritime trade, many administrations made decision from March this year to extend of agreements and seafarer certificates. Thus, despite of the ILO MLC regulations regarding the maximum stay on board of 11 months, many been forced to remain for 15, 16, or even more months. Secondly, safe manning and hours of rest are critical and crucial for safety on already fatigued crew. And furthermore, the question of remote inspection and computer-based training or e-learning on ships came as additional burden to already reduced ships' crews. All of this within situation of impossibility of crew change and no proper post-state control inspection put the situation beyond the limits. Going back to crew change, which is pre-required issue to be solved. And the ITF already on the other webinars as well, proposed and believes that the short terms or immediate terms needed for step forward are as it is now, and as many governments have committed to give effect to the demands of safe passage of seafarers and collaborate with the industry and social partners of building a solution, it appears that the next step should be concentrate efforts on affecting crew change in regions and in ports of the international trade. Collaboration and sharing information are of the great importance. This effort from lesson learned and the best practice will draw more national attention to the issue of importance of shipping and the seafarers as a key workers and as essential for the country. Thank you for now, and I'm open for any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Branko. There is a question from the floor, and it is whether IMO would decide to designate ports for crew changes. And I will mention about that later on when I when I deliver first some recent developments and information about decisions taken by the Maritime Safety Committee. Before we move to the last agenda item for today, please allow me to say a few words about the recent and ongoing work by the IMO and actions taken during the COVID-19 pandemic. In April this year, the Secretary General of IMO established the Seafarers Crisis Action Team, known as SCAT. SCAT takes necessary actions through diplomatic channels and cooperates with global industry groups in order to intervene in specific cases regarding crew change, repatriation, access to medical care, and or abandonment. On 21st of September this year, the Maritime Safety Committee, at its second extraordinary session, adopted resolution MSC 473 on recommended action to facilitate ship crew change, access to medical care, and seafarer travel during the COVID-19 pandemic, whereby, inter alia, it invited member states and relevant national authorities to designate national focal points on crew change and repatriation of seafarers, to coordinate action at national level, and to inform the Secretary General accordingly so that member states could be advised for the purpose of coordination. Earlier this week, Maritime Safety Committee, at its 102nd session, adopted MSC.1 Circular 1637 on industry recommended framework of protocols for ensuring safe ship crew changes and travel during the coronavirus pandemic. Furthermore, the committee considered a proposal for development of a new GISIS module to register ports that facilitate crew changes and disseminate information provided by member states. And that probably answers the question from the floor. I now turn to our last item, agenda item 4, closing remarks. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. On behalf of the Secretary General of IMO, I thank you very much for participating at this webinar. For more than 6 decades, the IMO has been developing a comprehensive framework of international standards to ensure the safety of life at sea. We have learned from past maritime casualties, and we have addressed safety, management, training of seafarers and fishers. We have adopted rules on hours of work and rest at sea, in line with our sister UN agency, the International Labour Organization. We have issued up-to-date guidance on the causes, consequences, and risks of seafarer fatigue. And yet today, we see the fundamentals on which IMO standards are based balancing on a fragile knife edge. It is because of the sacrifices of seafarers who who have continued working after their contracts have expired, that ports have remained open for trade, so allowing cargo operations to be carried out in a timely manner and goods to continue to circulate smoothly. The world owes a great debt to seafarers for maintaining supply chains throughout the pandemic. So therefore, when you report back to your respective governments the outcome of your participation at this webinar, please highlight the need for decision on the following actions. 1. Designate seafarers as key workers, providing an essential service to facilitate safe and unhindered embarkation and disembarkation from their ships. Second, undertake national consultations involving all relevant ministries, agencies, and departments to identify obstacles to crew changes and establish and implement measurable time-bound plans to increase the rate of such crew changes. Third, consult with representative ship owners and seafarers organizations when developing and implementing measures related to or that have an impact upon crew changes of seafarers, in particular for those states which are parties to the Maritime Labour Convention in relation to achieving full compliance with the obligations enshrined in the Convention. 4. Continue complying with the resolution MSC 473 and implement MSC.1 Circular 1637 on industry recommended framework of protocols for ensuring safe ship crew changes and travel during the coronavirus pandemic. And last but not least, 5, refrain from authorizing any new extension of seafarers' employment agreements beyond the default maximum period of 11 months in accordance with the Maritime Labour Convention. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, we all need to work together. We all depend on seafarers. Seafarers deliver for us, and we need to deliver for them. Thank you. And now this webinar is completed. Goodbye.